Camera. Action. Welcome to Idea to IPO. Hello, I'm Jennifer Stowell. Idea to IPO has been hosting tech startup events in Silicon Valley for many, many years. We launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no events and no members. At this stage, we have over 150,000 members among all of our meetup groups all across the world. We have organized, promoted, and produced over 2,714 events. By any standard, by any measure, we are the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the history of Silicon Valley, bar none. We organize venture capital panels, legal workshops, networking events, and more. These days, we are 100% online. Check out our schedule at ideatoipo.com. We hold an event nearly every day of the week. At this point, we are going to hand it off to our distinguished moderator, Roger Royce. Roger, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jennifer, for that introduction, and thank you to Idea to IPO for hosting this event. This is the first venture capital panel we've done for a while, at least I've done for a while, and this one is on the topic of AgTech, one that's a favorite of mine. So a couple of housekeeping items before we jump into this. First of all, this is being recorded. After the panel is over, you'll get an email from me with a copy of a link to the recording if you want to go back and review it. So don't worry, you will be getting an email from me. Secondly, I just want to let you know how the morning's going to go. This is the first time we've done one at 9 a.m. Pacific, so I'm hoping that we get a kind of a whole new group of attendees here. We'll find out. But in Idea to IPO fashion, we will have our panel first, and then we'll have a Q&A session following that. So stay tuned for that. If you have questions, type them into the Q&A chat box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end of the panel discussion. Now you'll notice there is a chat box, and I've enabled that for everybody to talk to everybody else if you'd like. So if you've got something to say, post your LinkedIn profile there. I'm going to do it in a minute here. Your Twitter feed, I'm going to post to our AgTech YouTube channel, our AgTech LinkedIn group. If you're interested in AgTech, you should be subscribing and signing up and joining all those groups where we post content daily about everything that's happening in AgTech. So use the chat box, use it to talk to everybody else as well. Okay, let me change, don't worry, I'll change the view in a minute here once we get started. So a couple of other things. If you're tweeting, tweet to hashtag Idea to IPO and make sure that you sign up for all our news groups. Now, I'd like to do a little poll here, find out who's in the audience. As I said, this is the first time that we've done this at 9 a.m. So I'm wondering if that makes a difference as to who shows up. We usually get a lot of startup entrepreneurs, but let's find out. Okay, 60% startup entrepreneurs so far, 15% and 20%. Wow, a lot of investors in this one. Handful of service providers. With about 70% of the vote in, it looks like it's 62% startup entrepreneurs and 17% investors, 10% service providers. Okay, so our panelists should know that, so we can tailor our comments. Let's try another poll here. I'm really curious as to where everybody's from because of the time difference. Our panel is all over the time zones. We got West Coast, we got Central Time, we got East Coast, we even got Singapore time. So where are you from? Let me know where you're from. We usually get a big Silicon Valley contingent here. That's polling a little lighter on Silicon Valley than normal. We're only at 17%, a little more on other North America, more than 50%. We've got more people from Europe than we have during our evening sessions. Surprise. No surprise about that. We've got let's see, where else? Eastern Europe, South Pacific, Asia. We've got a few. Other North America is most of it. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and chat to you the information that I mentioned about our AgTech group. Okay, so 70% Silicon Valley, 51% other North America, 11% Western Europe, 8% Asia, 3% Eastern Europe, 3% South Pacific, 2% other. All righty. Okay, so with that, thank you for joining the webinar. This is Venture Capital Investment and latest innovations in AgTech. For about 10 years now, the technology of food production is one of the steadiest and fastest growing investment sectors. It is a large and crowded field, but there's still a lot of opportunity in the space. And in my opinion, at least, there aren't that many industry leaders on the tech side that have emerged to dominate quite a few areas of AgTech yet: data, robotics, automation, soil biologics, and supply chain. So we've got a panel of venture capitalists come argue with me about that. They're going to cover which agricultural technologies are the hottest sectors, how has COVID affected the supply chain, will investment in AgTech stay strong, what are the most promising technologies, what are investors most interested in, etc. On our panel today, we have Jolly Day. She's chair of Ag Food Health Span, Claire Pribula, co-founder of the Yield Lab Asia Pacific, and Ephraim Lindenbaum, managing director of Advanced Ventures, very well-known voices in investment in AgTech here in the Valley. So with that, before we get started, I think I'd like, in my usual fashion, to let our panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you come to this space. And Jolly, why don't we start with you?
Well, thank you so much, Roger, for including me in this conversation. And greetings from Austin, Texas. I got my degree. I've always been in food and agriculture. I'm not a newcomer. My degree is in plant biology, and I started as an academic for the first 20 years. I'm going to date myself now. My research was in plant biology, plant molecular biology, and biochemistry. And about 20 years ago, I switched. I decided 20 years was enough in academia, so I entered venture capital. I was living in Palo Alto and on Sand Hill Road. What do you do other than investing in a startup? So that's how I ended up in this.
Thank you very much. Claire, I know you're coming to us all the way from Singapore in the middle of the night. So tell us a little bit about you and Yield Lab.
Well, thanks for having me, Roger. I really enjoy these panels. As far as my background is in technology for over 30 years. I'm from St. Louis originally, which is kind of a very strong agricultural ecosystem, but I've been in Asia Pacific for the past 20. Always creating new lines of businesses and new businesses for large multinationals. Did my own startup, got involved in that. With that startup, our largest customer ended up being Monsanto, and which brought me more into the agribusiness space. After a successful exit, I got connected back in St. Louis with Thad Simons and Larry Taylor, and we started putting together a plan for the Yield Lab. Thad Simons is the founder of the Yield Lab. We're an early stage AgTech VC that's in the US, started in the US, Europe, Latin America, and now Asia Pacific is the latest fund. I'm the managing director of that fund.
You've been expanding, it looks like. I've been seeing the notices with your fund.
Yeah, we just in Europe just got to our 60 million close of that fund. Our Global Opportunity Fund has reached its close. We also are doing more things in the our not-for-profit side, which is we use our not-for-profit side to kind of throw the hook out into areas of agriculture which are likely touched with innovation, and by running challenges, and they're non-dilutive, non-equity taking in this way to stimulate innovation as a precursor to our funds, and also as a give back to everybody to generate innovation that's going to help fill in the gaps of the inefficiencies that exist across all the different pillars of agriculture.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Claire. So F, you're on.
Thank you so much, Roger. It's great to be on a great panel with Ella and Claire, just phenomenal panelists. My name is Ephraim Lindenbaum. I'm the managing director of Advanced Ventures. We're a Silicon Valley-based technology, health, and wellness investment fund. We've been investing since 1999. My background is actually as an entrepreneur. So I started and founded a company and grew it here in Silicon Valley and exited in the first dot-com boom back in 1999. And, you know, it's somewhat binary as an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley when you exit. You either start your next company or, you know, become an investor. I jokingly say I didn't have any great ideas to start another company, but really I found a great team of folks at Advance, and we spun up Advance in 1999. Actually have known Roger since then. He was on the deal team that helped sell my company in 99. That's how small a world it is. And in fact, we've been investing across, as I mentioned, technology, health, and wellness now for approximately 22 years. We're one of the first true AgTech investors. We invested in horsepower.com in year 2000. Unfortunately, it was way too early for AgTech and technology to come together. Farmers weren't yet connected and many other things were out there, but we learned through that process. We've invested across CPG, consumer packaged goods, functional beverages, functional foods. We've been very active in the alternative protein category, both on the consumer package side with Alpha Foods and on the fermentation and novel creation side with Myco Technologies, both of which are leaders in the category. We've invested in the beverage category, animal feed, and many other areas that touch broadly the ag and food space. And, you know, it's certainly part of our core mantra and one of our key sectors.
Okay, thanks. And I'm Roger Royce, your moderator. I'm a partner with the International Am Law 100 law firm of Haynes and Boone. And obviously I work a lot in the sector. I'm going to stay with you, F, for a second. You might remember it was about a year ago now that we were doing panels right, you know, in the middle or at the height of the COVID pandemic. And we were talking about how that's going to change food distribution, especially in the supply chain. Well, here we are a year later. If you're in any place other than California, I guess you're pretty much over COVID now. So how has it changed in the United States anyway? How has it changed? Did all your predictions come true? And if not, which ones have?
Yeah, well, so I learned long ago to not predict. You know, we're lucky as venture capitalists to get a reasonable percentage of survival and or success. So I don't predict, but what I do is, and I think we did it on the call or on the webinar or Zoom that we did last year. You know, there were a lot of holes that were being exposed across the entire supply chain. Lots of challenges, many of which had been out there for many years. Whether it was actual harvesting, distribution, supply chain for materials. And ultimately, as it moved deeper into the supply chain, the sheer, different sort of elements of the ag supply chain, the different hands, if you will, the broker channel, the dealer channel, the elements in a lot of the food chain, supply chain really did break down. I think what it did do in a lot of cases, it brought a lot of attention to consumer brands, which has been great for our products. As people ate at home, they went out and bought products, many of which were investments of ours, which is exciting. The push to alternative protein and food security became a huge push. Both nationally and internationally, seeing meat and other plants first go down with the pandemic, and now with cybersecurity issues, food security has become a big issue. And that really started first with consumers at home hoarding toilet paper and, food items and, feel good, canned soups. And now that extends all the way into the actual, supply chain for security. So, from that standpoint, it's exposed a lot of the gaping holes that many of us knew existed. I'm not sure many, sort of solves have come up. We've looked at a lot of companies today that are trying to solve some of those. I'm not sure it makes a big difference. We've seen, farmers and ranchers making hard decisions based on, climate change and other issues, the lack of support, whether that's on the ranch or the farm, with additional labor shortages. So there have been a lot of issues that are out there right now. I think this is a very challenging time in the ag tech space. Historically, ag and food had a much longer time horizon in the venture world than other traditional tech or biotech or health tech type investments. And that's even pushing out longer now. The pandemic has taken at least 18 to 24 months out of the exit trajectory. It's pushed off a lot of innovation that we've seen that was, sort of in the pipeline to be adopted. And I think unless it's a must have, it is very much off radar. Now, technology improvements and a lot of things are coming, but getting the attention of the supply chain, getting the attention of the farm or food production side is very, very hard right now. To use an analogy, if the house isn't on fire and it's a bucket of water, no one's interested right now.
About our other panelists, has that been your experience as well, especially overseas?
Well, I actually, right after the pandemic shutdown, about sort of mid-spring, I had time because I wasn't in the traffic, I had time to do some writing. And I wrote a series of articles very early in the shutdown period, where I made some prediction for implication for AgTech and food tech investments. Some of the things were obvious because we saw immediately how the supply chain disruptions were happening right in front of our eyes. Some things were not obvious. So I am now writing a series now on what I got right and what I missed and what surprised me. So all the things that F said obviously happened, and many of them were obvious. But the couple of things that I argued and they were not so obvious at the time, where one was inflation. One of the things I predicted would be inflation in what we need and deflation in what we want. So the inflation in AgTech, not AgTech, but in food and agriculture is happening in an amazing way. Within the last year or so, ag commodities, on average, the core commodities like soybean, corn, wheat, they have gone up 80 to 100%, 20% just in the last 3 months. And I have a slide, I can't do it right now, but it's amazing the kind of inflation you saw in ag commodities. So the other thing that I predicted, which I'm pleased about, I argued that we can no longer talk about food as a national security implicitly. Food security is always a national imperative, no matter what country you are in. And so implicitly has always been part of our articulation of our national security. So I argued that it needs to be explicit. We no longer can say food is important. It is a critical element, and we should treat it like, borders and other things that we explicitly put in the bucket of our national security. So I was right in these two areas, but a lot of things that F mentioned, but obviously I predicted would happen, and they have happened.
Yeah, especially the national security.
If you want to know what surprised me, I can go into that. The two things I got wrong or did not anticipate. The one area that I was totally off and wrong was the venture capitalist and PE appetite for investment. And that's because I could not see the magnitude and duration of pumping money, both monetary and fiscal. I don't think anybody saw that. I didn't see it either. I knew the government would come in, especially the Feds, but I didn't think this kind of fiscal is signal. So that I was wrong on that. So VC is thriving right now. PE is thriving. The other thing that it never occurred to me was this kind of hacking with our food system, with our commodity system. So these are the two areas I was wrong or did not see it.
The hacking, you mean like the big meat plant that got hacked recently?
And then oil, energy and food, these are national security issues.
Yeah, they absolutely are. Well, we've been I've been on panels talking about that for 10 years now about cybersecurity, and it was just a matter of time before agriculture had to deal with the same problems every other industry does.
By the
And
way, Roger, anybody who wants to see the complete series that I published, they are on my LinkedIn. They were published in Global Ag Investment website, so they can go.
Good. Well, put it in the chat. I think we'd all like to look at that. Claire, I want to give you a chance to get in here as well. What do things look like overseas?
Well, being in Singapore on an island, Singapore, as usual, was ahead of the curve in identifying food as a national security challenge before the pandemic. But it only became far more critical during the pandemic, and only as Singapore can do, which is to rally and kind of pull it together. But the supply chains being very long and being very fragile because food is originating from other sources. It's heightened the awareness of the fact that we still, after all these years talking about supply chain, I mean, I back when I was at IBM, we were rolling out a supply chain solution, and that was 20 years ago. And yet still, innovation is just now getting to the point where there's something in it for everyone to participate in a true end-to-end farm-to-fork supply chain solution. So we're seeing some good ones now, but it's also heightened the fact that there's a tremendous amount, because you've already talked about some of the topics, so I'll go a different direction. There's a tremendous amount of food waste, and this just heightens that. Even there's enough being grown on this planet, it's just not getting to its final destination. And with this pandemic, it just made it even worse. So innovation that's able to place itself along the supply chain and remove mycotoxins and bacteria and fungus off of grains, off of food, and get it to its final destination and ensure everything that's grown is actually reaching the place it needs to be, is going to be an amazing impact. And there is innovation out there that's doing that. So I think, in general, from a Singapore perspective, already a fragile supply chain, which was completely broken during the pandemic, and alternate plans need to be made. But the good news is that there is technology now that's catching up to providing full end-to-end traceability, and to be able to invoke action plans if a supply chain breaks. And also there's innovation out there that can help make sure that the food is being refreshed and kept in its original state as it moves in through the supply chain. I think this is innovation that's going to be pivotal going forward.
Yeah, those are technologies I think we were talking about a year ago, and I think what you're saying is the ball has advanced a little. I want to raise a kind of a different issue, which might sound a little out of sequence, but I want to make sure we get to it this hour. Since this is our cutting edge AgTech panel, you guys are right on the forefront of everything. We're in another drought here in California. Mm-hmm. And I remember the last drought. Remember, you and I were on panels talking about water technology, and everybody was extremely concerned about it. Ranchers were killing their cattle. Farmers were going 300 feet down looking for briny water in California in their wells, and the drought ended, and everyone forgot that California is a desert. Well, here we are again. How do you think? I remember the last time, and I'm sure you do too, but do you think that's going to drive some of the technologies that we're going to see, some of the innovation and some of the money that's going to get invested? Anybody?
Yeah.
Roger, you're so right. This water issue may go away for a year when you have above normal precipitation. But I think for California and the West, US West in general, it's a persistent issue. So the way I look at water is a commodity. I think the commodity prices are going up partially because of this drought and some acreage partially out of production. So I think water management solutions is going to be critical. In fact, we are looking at a number of water management deals, and we are very keen on seeing them invested in.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, if I recall, Roger, you and I actually drove out to, I think it was Sacramento, and I think maybe even, God knows, someplace, even deeper into the California heartland, so to speak, on one of these issues. So, I think memories tend to be short in this regard. Farmers tend to live in sort of an environment of feast or famine, right? I mean, there are, all kinds of challenges that they face. It's one of, my God, the hardest jobs in the world, right? You can do everything you do on a daily basis, use every tool in your toolbox, and then have all of these sort of unknowns, whether it's pests or climate or weather or, God knows, a windstorm in Iowa that knocks all of your stocks down. So, there's a lot out there. We've certainly looked at, and we do have a great company that's in the water testing space, as well as food pathogenic testing, high speed, trying to help with a lot of these issues. But, I think it's a combination of acceptance from the industry, right? It's like, if you look at the tech industry and as cyber issues became clearer and clearer in email and many of these other challenges, spam, et cetera, adoptions were made there. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that in the ag tech space. But there are not quite the level of solves that we would like. I mean, the solve for, a water shortage in California is very challenging. There isn't a tech solution. You can only go so deep in the water. This is sort of Hail Mary desalination, 4-foot pipes going over the mountains into the valley kind of stuff that we're going to have to look at as a state going forward if we want to maintain this mass agricultural base, right? And when you start to look at, can we convert this to indoor? Can we find better and safer and more effective ways? I mean, these are very small sort of drops in a very, very, very deep well that we're talking about, right? So, while we can manage our way to 10% or 15% or better crop types to gain a little edge here or there, or do some more indoor, if we're going to maintain the base that we've experienced over the last, 200 years in California, there's going to have to be a pretty big Hail Mary. And I think there are many states in the Gulf and in the Mediterranean that have adopted things like this and made it successful. But these are big infrastructure issues, I believe.
Let me pause on that for a second. I have seen a lot of technologies around this, and I'm wondering, as an investor, if you would invest in some of these. Let me give you an example. Desal is one.
Love detail.
You do? Okay. Water from air. I've been seeing that for a long time. I don't know if that has an agricultural use, but you probably bottle it. And then the other ones are just water management, like Jolly was talking about, just real smart irrigation, where you use a lot less water. Would those be interesting to you as an investor?
I think all of the categories are interesting. In terms of water management, ag management, irrigation management, that's been a category that's been out there for a long time. The improvements, at least we're seeing, are very, very incremental. So, we're not seeing that, Hail Mary high volume transition there that I think makes a big difference. Number one, desalination is great. You've just got to have a source, right? So, in the state of California, desal is challenging because there's a mountain range for the most part between the ocean and a lot of the areas. There is the Delta. There is some discussion about that, but there's some very deep environmental issues there that will have to be addressed in order to make some of that happen. But otherwise, water management, et cetera. Farmers are surprisingly efficient already today, and we just don't see the volume there making a difference, and we also don't see the venture exit, in that category, unfortunately.
Okay. Claire, is this a U.S. phenomenon or some of your other funds in other parts of the world, especially Europe? We have some Europeans here interested in this topic as well.
Well, I think the circular economy and single cell protein and water technologies is pretty key. Singapore has no natural water source, so where I sit, but China, which has a lot of water, 20% of the water is polluted. It's coming out of processing facilities. So in the provinces, so you've got to find a solution. And there's some cool innovation that's circular, that's being able to take the water, clean from a poultry processing plant, take the waste and feed it to bacteria to create single cell protein, and then use the the water for aquaculture. So that circular economy solution, iCell Aqua is an innovation that we've been talking to recently because of some other things. But they're doing, and I don't know if you know them, but they were originally kind of ping ponged. They started in the innovation started in the U.S. really way back when taking from breweries back, I think in 2001, like 20 years ago or something, these two innovators, and to create nutrition, animal nutrition. And then the innovation was licensed to Gentech in Hong Kong. So iCell is now out of China and Hong Kong. But the iCell Aqua is creating aqua park in Rhode Island. So there's it's funny how it's just kind of, and the reason why is because regulation. I mean, if China had the regulation, which didn't allow for you to dump the poultry or the sugar processing water, whatever, into a waterway, then it would probably be launched in China. I think China is moving this direction because when they just had the People's Party where 3,000 members all got together for the big shindig, agriculture was one of the most important things. Water, the use of arable land being devoted, all available arable land being devoted to agriculture. So the tides are changing in China. So I think you'll see more attention in this region in regards to circular solutions.
You know what I remember about Asia, because our program, our AgTech Innovation Network, we do programs all over the world, and we did a whole month in Asia in 2017. I remember controlled environment ag being a big deal over there. And it's certainly been some developments here in the United States. I talked to a company last week that claims to be able to grow pineapples in West Texas. So Jolie, you'll probably be seeing them in Austin soon. But Claire, is that still a big thing, or is that a big sector? Controlled environment, indoor urban ag?
Yes, I mean, Singapore's got I don't want to make this too much a Singapore-centric Asia discussion because Singapore is just one small portion of this region. But Singapore made it three areas of focus for the next 20 years and around AgTech, and it's controlled environment ag is one, aquaculture, and alternative proteins, clean meat. So yes, there are in Singapore indoor farms popping up everywhere. Suddenly, even seed is being distributed by the government to the citizens so that they can start to grow their own plants in their home. But controlled environment ag is extremely important here because, again, it's about food security and self-sufficiency.
Roger, you are so right so spot on to bring this topic up. I'm going to go back to my series of articles. One of the things I predicted it wasn't too difficult to predict, was decentralization of food, growing of food, farming and delivery, distribution. So one of the things that is very important about indoor agriculture, it is the best vehicle to decentralize food supplies, which then contributes to supply chains, contributes to national security, and all of that. So this indoor agriculture, it is actually nicely maturing. There were a lot of companies that we couldn't really understand why they do the way they do things. But now the whole indoor farming has come to a stage that is ripe for consolidation, actually, but contributes to this decentralization. That is, as a result of post-pandemic, we all want more decentralized, more deglobalized supply chains.
Yeah, and adding to both of the great points from my co-panelists here, I mean, I think, we view fermentation in that particular category. One of our companies, Myco, is really developing a 1.1 input to one output kind of model versus the 47,000 times you have with something like, animal protein, particularly cows, right? So, and that's very interesting, to folks across Asia, the Gulf, et cetera. And I think at the end of the day, being able to look at waste streams that individual countries produce and then being able to turn those through novel mechanisms, most likely fermentation, et cetera, into high value protein sources is very much where we believe the future of the food system is in the world. That will not fundamentally replace your microgreens or your animal protein, but it will limit it. And in so many of the products, particularly in the highly developed United States and other categories, are fundamentally highly processed, right? So if your child eats chicken McNuggets, or a similar nugget kind of product, whether there is 10% animal protein versus plant-based, or 0 or 50, to a large degree, the flavor profile now, the aftertaste, the texture, these things have been solved. And we have a company called Alpha Foods that puts out a plant-based nugget that I would put up against just about every other product available in the in the frozen section that's animal based. And things like that ultimately change the dynamic. And as those plant-based products come from better and more efficient plants, not just traditional soy or pea protein, but can come from fermented proteins where you've got very low input to output ratios, then you start to move the needle. And what I think happens is, when you look at gas output in the United States, animals are a very, very big factor. We've just recently seen some methane capture technology that gets very interesting. We've seen a microbiome product for ranchers that basically reduce flatulence, for lack of a better word, in cows, thus reducing their output. I think the government will ultimately, through USDA, fund that company and force it down as a supplement on the entire ranching industry. I think we're going to see some of that over time. So there's a lot of things that can be done in that category. The real issue is what's venture and what's what we call ESG. What's a social investment, which may or may not yield the kind of respective venture return that we look for, versus a true venture investment. And I think that's the big quandary we're seeing in this category right now. And I think Claire made some great points about China, and Jella made great points about supply chain. But you've got to have the classic economic model. There has to be a payer, there has to be a customer, and there ultimately has to be an exit. And who's the buyer out there? And I think that's the big challenge. Roger, you talked about Asia right now. There isn't a buyer in China. I think many of the large scale funds in the West have felt like they've been either burned, or what they had hoped come true in Asia, particularly China, hasn't. So many of them have pulled out. There hasn't been, since 2017, the economic model there, unfortunately. Southeast Asia is better, but liquidity is our story, right? And as essential investors that need to return a meaningful return on capital to effectively remain in the high risk category where we are, finding the right deals are very, very challenging in ag. And that's why we've looked at things like, alternative protein, CPG in the category, fermentation, areas like that.
If I can just say one more thing about controlled environment agriculture. Who's it really for anyway? I mean, it should be for those that can't get access to produce, to fresh produce. Those are in food deserts. Those are in, climates that can't grow produce. And Singapore is an example of this, but it's not a hard up country. So until the prices come down and controlled environment, using less water, less power, I think that still controlled environment agriculture is not going to. It still needs to reach that point to mass adoption, to where it's not just a luxury that I can, place an order and get a fresh salad in the afternoon that's freshly picked. And that's, I think, something that we all in the industry need to work towards, or to help the innovators work towards.
You all have said so many things that I would really love to drill down on, but I want to make sure that I get to a couple of topics. One in particular, our audience is 50% non-Silicon Valley here. So I always, when I have AgTech panels, I like to talk about how widely dispersed this industry can be. And I've been seeing Silicon Valley VCs invest outside the area the last year. Jolly, you moved to Texas.
Yeah.
And Claire, you're way over in Singapore doing this sort of
Don't hate
investment.
me for that, Roger.
What's that?
Don't hate me for that.
No, okay, I'll try not to.
I was still the girl you knew. So,
Okay.
yeah.
But for our non-Silicon Valley AgTech companies, do they have as much opportunity to attract a venture capitalists like you folks as they did when they were here in the Valley?
Well,
Yeah, so I think Silicon Valley is still the star, is the shining bright star in the sky. It's a center of gravity still. But I think what is interesting is places like Austin, Raleigh, North Carolina, San Diego, or even Missouri, St. Louis. These places are becoming their own hubs. And there are opportunities. The deal flow is good in Austin, very good, because more and more people are coming here. And I think there is an obvious effort led by Steve Case. His Rise of the Rest Fund is specifically designed to invest in non-Silicon Valley companies. So in fact, one of my companies recently got a Series A that was anchored by Steve Case's Rise of the Rest. So I think there are plenty of opportunities here, but I still think Silicon Valley is the shining bright star.
yeah.
Jeff, would you invest in a St. Louis company?
Certainly. I mean, all of our ag tech investments have been outside of Silicon Valley. I mean, I sit on multiple boards in Denver. I sit on boards in Arizona. We've invested at across the country. So, I think ag has always been a non-Silicon Valley model for the most part. In fact, there are very few ag deals that have really spun up from Silicon Valley. They may have come here for capital or resources or management. Silicon Valley is the hub of capital for this industry, right? And then that capital and resource base can, sort of come out like a star into other areas, right? The capital and the legal elements like that in this ecosystem are really the Silicon Valley story. I mean, certainly, Singapore is a great financial hub as well, but in the US and in the venture capacity, this is the case, right? So, if the company's based in Missouri, you can have a Silicon Valley law firm, which I know you've had done for years, Roger. You can have a Silicon Valley venture investor like us. You just don't need to actually be here. And that's okay for us. I mean, we're not making investments based, look, if you're a AI chip startup, sure, you should be right next to Google, right? But if you are an ag tech player, you should be near your customers, right? And if you're a cannabis or a hemp or any other category in the supply chain or the value chain there, you should be where your customers are. What we have is the capacity to ideally, understand deals, get deals through a pipeline, provide guidance, provide resources, provide the level of, infrastructure that it takes to build and most importantly, exit companies. And, I keep rolling back to the word exit, and hopefully we'll get to Q&A here real quick. But, exit is really the critical story in ag. And the reason why we've seen ag tech, having done it since 2000, go through these boom and bust cycles from an investor standpoint is because the exits aren't there. And, all of a sudden it's much easier for all of us to go back to biotech or health tech or technology. When we have three legs of our investment stool and this one goes long, the rest of the team and your investors say, hey, wait, you're really good at all this other stuff. Maybe you should put a little more effort there. So I think we need to be thoughtful about that cycle as well.
If I can just chime in for just a second, I mean, we're early stage seed and Series A VC and focusing on ag tech, and we were always non-residential. We don't care where the innovation is. As a matter of fact, nothing could be worse than, and the term accelerator just really kind of bothers me. But what we do is really more like early stage private equity, and we're very hands-on in providing the right kind of subject matter experts to help these 30-year subject matter experts out of the relevant area of industry, help these founders get through to commercialization. But we leave them where they are, and nothing could ruin them quicker than pulling them out of Vietnam and making them sit next to you. But the uniqueness about Asia Pacific, just to be a bit global, is the smallholder farmers. 70% of the produce comes from smallholder farmers. So it's a very unique sort of environment here in Asia Pacific. So when you're thinking of the US versus and AgTech versus Asia Pacific, this is something that really needs to be thought about. The innovations that are focusing on smallholder farmer solutions are quite unique and have to be able to aggregate, whether it's the getting credit to smallholder farmers, or whether it's looking at getting some sort of affordable sensor to where you can assess and do prescriptive analytics for microclimate data. This is all very unique to this region, and also Africa and Latin America, the smallholder farmer epicenters. So just adding a little bit of a global flavor to the focus.
Okay, well, thanks very much. We're going to open up the questions a little early this time because some of our panelists have other commitments. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. In the chat box, you should put things like the thing I just put, LinkedIn pages. But if you have questions for us, put them in the Q&A and we'll go to that. But first of all, thank you, panel, for that. We could talk for hours about all of these topics. I'm going to take these a little out of order, but one that I wanted to talk about, but someone gave me a question that tees it up perfectly, is rural broadband and connectivity and what's going on, especially in the infrastructure bill discussions right now. I've been hearing for years we're going to get a big rural broadband bill so that the whole country, can be connected and on the grid. Before that happens, how do we deal with that problem is the question here in rural areas. Does anyone want to take that?
Sure. We've been looking at this kind of tech. There are a lot of new innovations with both low orbital satellite and other models, mesh networks, ultra broadband. There's also a couple of other models that we're seeing out there to create more connectivity. I think the overarching issue is economics, right? Is the value, and farmers have really been, I think, the most advanced folks. I mean, I remember when we started getting into ag, investing in the early 2000s, seeing, $100 million combines that were connected to satellites and had all kinds of tech. I mean, farmers have been using very advanced tech, but there has to be maximum ROI. So the spend to light up an irrigation station, at 50 acres out versus the potential loss or control functions, which they're able to do in just a straight automation level, has got to be there. And I think, farmers are highly practical people, in all areas. And to Claire's point, especially in subsistent areas, the ROI has to be so immense. So, we'd love to see the infrastructure bill make a difference. We'd love to see some, private infrastructure like low orbital satellites make a difference. But until that stuff comes in, it's still a stretch, and only for high value crops is what we're seeing.
Other panelists have any comments on that? Connectivity, challenges?
I would add to what F said in terms of challenges, that I don't have a solution, but I would like somebody to think it through and come up with some solution. One of the things that worries me is the next generation farmers. The current farmers' children are not going into farming. And that could have major consequences for us, as not the suburbs and near the city farms, like within 200 miles, but way out there. I think we need to find a way to keep the farming families continuing in farming.
Yeah, well, that labor shortage is something that I think F touched on earlier in the hour. And that I've always felt that's been driving a lot of the innovation. I'm not sure there would have been a Blue River Tech if it hadn't been for the fact that labor costs so much in California. That's an exaggeration, but you get the idea.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that is the solution to the labor problem, is automation, do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess not. So we'll go on to the next question. Data management needs of smallholder farmers. What are the opportunities there in data management? Is that a sector? Is that something you would invest in, and what sort of product?
You know,
Yeah.
farmers.
Oh, sorry, go
Please.
ahead.
No, please go on, Claire, please.
No, from a smallholder farmer perspective, they're just not known, right? So they need to become known, and they need to be able to have some visibility of what's going on to be able to optimize what they do on their 5 hectares of land. So they don't have the money to pay for something. It's really more about the input providers, you know, being able to reach these smallholder farmers and to be able to do better things in aggregate. So that is for the smallholder to be able to somehow back into a credit, for example, a credit rating of that smallholder so they can get a low interest loan. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to understand their soil quality, to be able to understand what they've previously produced. Like in India, they have FPOs, which are like the co-ops, and to be able to go through them and get this kind of data to be able to then provide and kind of stave off the challenges smallholder has in being able to get loans. So they can, no smallholder farmer wants to be a smallholder farmer. They want to be able to earn more. Also to be able to have a marketplace where they can actually be able to sell their output, or to optimize the land that they have and plant what needs to be planted, or to do predictive and prescriptive analytics and tell them when there's an onset of disease it's going to happen. So you're looking at the entire smallholder farmer network versus just the one smallholder, and that's where the solutions are. They're all about taking smallholders and giving total visibility across all of them.
It's interesting you mentioned that data. You know, Claire, out in Texas, there's a farm data cooperative, first one in the country. It's been around a couple of years now. That might be the model for the rest of the country, where farms will aggregate their data into a co-op so that everybody can use that. Any other comments on the needs of data management needs? Okay, let's go on to another question here. Could the panel comment on the Chinese development of multi-building, multi-story hog farms? One has 100,000 sows, which will produce 2 million pigs per annum, versus U.S. industry is very critical. I guess the broader issue, well, there's a lot of issues raised by that question, so we could take that apart a lot of different ways. I look at that and I think about alternative protein. I think of pigs in China, I think alternative protein because of what happened over the last couple of years. I also think about food safety issues. Anybody want to comment on any aspect of that?
I mean, also it's a vaccination issue to try, you know, get a remedy for African swine fever, and to be able to come up with a, you know, that's putting stress on all the different proteins in the country. So there are solutions there that are more scalable, cell-based solutions to be able to create, run multiple tests to get to a vaccine that'll solve the ASF issue.
Yeah, Claire, how did that shake out?
AgTech is a company that has this.
I was just going to say, a year ago, we were talking about this, about, you know, swine flu in China and how that was affecting worldwide markets. And some people predicted that would usher in an area of alternatives. Some people said it was more a biotech thing, like you just said. How did that shake out? How did that end up? Who was right? What technologies won?
Well, it is true. Alternative proteins are very hot in this region right now. So I think that's one thing. Also, there's a lot of more innovation around aquaculture that's starting to come up, other proteins. It has stimulated innovation in other protein areas.
Yeah.
You know, Claire is so right, because in terms of protein needs in Asia, as the middle class in China grows and becomes more able to spend in a discretionary way, they want meat. They don't want, it's going to take another 10, 15 years before they sort of switch to alternative proteins in terms of plants. But I think insects could be an area that might be amenable for Chinese culture because they do eat animal proteins that are just beyond beef and lamb and chicken and that sort of thing. So insect proteins may be something that the Asian countries with high density population can consider.
And you see these big facilities and RAS aquaculture facilities that are being built and planned to be built across China. Pure Salmon is one, which is, you know, massive facilities that are on land. Japan, they've already they're almost done building that facility, and they've got 5 planned for across China. And it is a food safety issue. I mean, the people demand it. In this way, it's a closed environment, and it assures the quality of the protein.
Yeah, related to that, we had a question about mariculture. I'd never heard that term before. Open sea farming, introducing nutrients into the ocean to stimulate plankton growth, etc. Have you been seeing things like that? I know when we did our Asian tour in some South Asian countries, you know, fish was a big deal, and technologies around getting healthier, bigger fish was certainly popular.
I am a supporter of mariculture, but I would be horrified if we kept adding things to the ocean in order for the plankton to grow. What we need to do things to clean up the oceans. I would be horrified to add things in order for the plankton to grow. But I'm in favor of mariculture in a way that does not cause side effects, unknown consequences, you know, unintended consequences.
Okay.
Okay, you're gonna have to excuse me. I'm gonna have to sign off now for a board meeting. Appreciate it. Great panel. Lovely to see everybody here. Thank you so much, Roger. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, F.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Great to see you
Alrighty.
folks. Great panel. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So F left before we could get to the question as to whether you invest in cannabis, because I'm sure that being in Texas and Singapore, you do not.
Yeah, not yet.
So F was the only one.
No, actually, even when I was in Silicon Valley, I did deep dive into cannabis and all of that. And at the end, I decided I would not want to invest in recreational cannabis, just for my own value system. I would only invest in medicinal. And then I thought the medicinal is too complicated for FDA regulation and blah, blah, blah. It's a biotech kind of investment. So I basically stopped investing in cannabis.
Was that a good move as a financial matter?
I'm happy with that move.
Are you? Okay, okay.
Well, but our U.S. fund has invested in hemp, New West Genetics, which is a seed genetics and breeding company. It has all the different varieties of canopy in the world, and it is a place where it can actually, you know, extract the highly nutritious ratios of omegas-3 and 6, and so it's one of our investments in the U.S. and I think it's already into its Series B round.
Oh, okay, great. So,
They're based in Colorado, yeah.
of course, it's always someone from Colorado. Next question. We have created novel solutions on pest and irrigation systems, tested and verified in Nigeria. Still difficult to get the right funding to push the technology out there. How do we go about this? Any advice for this company?
I'm sorry, could you say the question again?
Yeah, I read that really fast, and you know, you can, the panelists should be able to read these, but I'll say it again. We've created novel solutions on pest and irrigation systems, tested and verified by 2 reputable universities in Nigeria. It's difficult to get the right funding to push the technology out there. How do we go about this?
Talk to to Gates Foundation.
The Gates Foundation?
That's what would be my advice. To get the bugs out of the system, make it a little bit more investable, de-risk it a little bit with philanthropy money, maybe.
Claire, do you have a comment?
Well, I mean, you could just, if you have a novel solution, you could send it to me. I mean, we are doing some analysis of Africa right now. So we have a colleague there in Senegal. So, you know, send me over, I put my link on the chat, and just send me what you're doing, and I'm happy to connect you.
I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in Africa. It's just a place that seems to be growing really quickly, and it's sort of leapfrogging in terms of a lot of technologies. Claire, I think you might have mentioned blockchain or provenance. That's one example. But in this infrastructure, you would expect to see the same thing. They're not really burdened by a lot of old technology. And in the developing world, generally, I understand there's a lot of money now going into building infrastructure. And it can be the newest, latest, greatest infrastructure, like a very smart irrigation system. I'm not sure what the pest control part is, but the irrigation I understand. So that ought to be a place that investors would be really interested in being. That's what I would think.
Yeah, I think that the challenge in Africa has just been making sure that the investment dollars are being used for the reasons that they were deployed. I think there's been a historical challenge in Africa around this, and also impact investors maybe not seeing the kind of return that they would expect in Africa. So there's been, I mean, when I talk to other colleagues in the VC space, these are conversations that happen about Africa.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Roger, I have to sign off. I apologize for doing it so early.
I'm going to be the last person standing, Roger, and it's almost 1 a.m. here.
We'll have a fireside chat here, I guess.
Thank you so much again for including.
Before you go, could you put in the chat how people can get a hold of you? Did you put your LinkedIn in the chat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank
All right, well,
you.
thanks very much, Joel. I appreciate it. So Claire, here's a question about carbon capture. What projects can monetize interest in carbon capture?
Well, we have one right now, Terviva, which is carbon negative solution. I don't know if I've ever mentioned them to you before, but they're right in your neighborhood, and they've just gone through their Series E round. It's based on the pangamia tree. The pangamia tree is all over the subtropics. It creates a bitter bean, a legume, and it's never been monetized before. And it's what I would call a adaptive crop, because it handles doesn't need much water, handles periodic flooding, and it's a carbon negative tree. So you're monetizing something that actually can be productive for 25, 30 years. And that's one thing right now that it's valued at over 180 million right now. This company.
Yeah, capture and sequestration is a big deal right now, isn't it? So glad to see that
There's a lot of marketplaces coming up around carbon capturing, and I know Yara is creating one, and quite a few are. So it's a hot spot right now.
Great. Hey, here's a question. Our space is tree crop pollination technology. We require extensive multi-year field studies, much like any other crop protection yield enhancer product. We have technology and agronomy aspects to our product. What's the best way for us to find an appropriate investor who has a longer term vision to exit? There's a lot in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, there is a lot in there. And I guess AgTech always is a little bit of a longer term exit, isn't it? It's 6 to 8 years.
Seems to be.
At least. Multi-year field studies. We have a technology and agronomy aspect. I guess, again, this is another one where I would need to know a little bit more and what geography you're in, and if it's something unique, we're happy to take a look at it. You can send me in a private chat to my LinkedIn, and happy to have a conversation with you and route you to some of the right people.
Okay.
I just don't know what geography. It doesn't tell me a lot here. So.
Yeah. All right. I believe we've gotten through all of the questions. If anybody has any other questions, now's your time. Speak now or forever hold your peace until you can email people. Okay, well, not seeing any further questions. I want to thank you, Claire, for hanging in there till the bitter
That's all
end.
right. Now I get to go to sleep. So thank
Yeah.
you.
It's 1 a.m. back in Singapore now. And although our panel is gone, I certainly would like to thank our panel for being here during working hours here in the US, and for you, Claire, being in the middle of the night in Singapore. And thank you to Idea to IPO for hosting this. And most of all, thank you to our audience for tuning in during working hours from all over the country. We hope that you join our LinkedIn startup group on AgTech. I hope you subscribe to my YouTube. You can watch this video plus a million others on almost any topic on startup or on AgTech or on other topics. So please subscribe. And with that, that is the end of the webinar, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Roger, for the opportunity. Bye-bye. Thank you.